On February 23, 1959, African-American historian and activist WEB Dubois stood in an auditorium at Beijing's Peking University in the People's Republic of China. On this day, his 91st birthday, the elderly Dubois addressed not only the horde of Chinese officials, professors, and students gathered to attend his speech, but also the broader world, particularly Africa and the United States.
Africa, arise, turn from the West in your slavery and humiliation for the last 500 years, and face the rising sun. This is not politics, this is common sense.
For Dubois, this was not a radical statement. Over the latter half of his life, Dubois had tentatively and unofficially embraced socialism and communism as societal and economic structures that could improve the quality of life for individuals of African descent all over the world. Dubois believed his 1959 trip to China would benefit Africans around the world because he would not only experience communism in action, but he would also form an alliance with a powerful Eastern ally capable of helping Africans succeed in breaking the chains of Western capitalism. For China, Dubois' trip meant an opportunity to expand the country's Afro-Asian relations. While Dubois held no political office, as the father of Pan-Africanism, he was an influential figure in developing African nations, such as Ghana, which China believed it could partner with to spread forms of socialism, as few Western countries wanted to engage politically with communists at the time of Dubois' visit. For both parties, Dubois' 1959 trip to China was a diplomatic visit concerning the future development of capitalism and socialism around the world. In the United States, a democratic capitalist nation, African Americans had not only been subject to slavery prior to the 1860s, but at the time of Dubois' speech in Beijing, they faced segregation, economic disparity, explicit societal and political racism, and violence, including the threat of lynchings. Likewise, in Africa, black individuals struggled under colonial rule controlled by democratic capitalist nations. For Dubois and many of his allies in the Pan-African movement, it was clear that the promises of freedom, equality, and safety provided by the capitalist West had not been kept. Eastern economic systems appeared to provide valid, albeit not universally perfect, solutions to the problems Africans faced all over the world. Therefore, when the CCP invited Dubois and his wife, Shirley Graham Dubois, for a visit in early 1959, he readily accepted. Dubois and his wife arrived in China on February 14, 1959, and stayed in the country for several months. Throughout the extent of their time abroad, Dubois and his wife were treated as honored guests, and they routinely interacted with acclaimed Chinese artists, influencers, and government officials, including Mao Zedong. The couple took part in various banquets, attended different social events, met influential members of the CCP, took an extensive tour of Beijing, and Dubois' wife was taken to visit the Great Wall of China. On February 23rd, the CCP organized an extravagant birthday party for Dubois. When Dubois wasn't taking part in the more extravagant side of Chinese culture and cuisine, he was experiencing what he believed to be communism at work. His tours throughout Beijing, which demonstrated the happiness, hard work, and equality of the Chinese people, helped convince Dubois that communism was the correct step forward for the African race. However, while Dubois experienced firsthand what China presented to him as the immense benefits of communism, just out of sight, the Chinese people struggled. Dubois and Graham Dubois knew absolutely nothing of the catastrophe inflicted upon the Chinese people by their omnipotent ruler. By the time Dubois arrived, nearly 10 million people had perished in the famine of the Great Leap Forward. The scenes to which the Duboises were exposed to presented a fable of disciplined bees working in revolutionary union. Hiding the immense fallback of the Great Leap Forward from Dubois would help guarantee his endorsement on the worldwide stage. In many ways, China made Dubois look like a gullible, idealistic fool. In the years after his visit, Dubois' writings on China endorsed the country's revolution in a series of essays, a poem, and his autobiography. Before his death, Dubois would even officially join the Communist Party. For China, their political goals for inviting Dubois had been achieved, which became even more apparent during his trip to Peking University. A hallmark of diplomatic political visits are public discussions and speeches filled with rhetoric but devoid of any meaningful politics. While Dubois made arguments at Peking University as to why Africa and its peoples should abandon the West and embrace the East, his speeches and political talks with the CCP officials included little discussion of how to politically achieve such a goal. Instead, Dubois' goal was to vaguely inspire African independence and encourage Afro-Asian relations. While Du Bois' trip may have been free of any intricate political and economic policy, photo ops can send a political message, and the CCP ensured that photos of the father of Pan-Africanism enjoying his trip traveling through China and interacting with its people reached a worldwide audience. While Du Bois' trip to China was politically superficial, it did help establish Afro-Asian political relations. However, the development of socialism and communism through Chinese relations struggled in Africa after socialism became less emphasized in the Pan-African movement and after the United States renewed its ties with China in the 1970s. This relationship signaled a tentative political reunion between the West and the East. Afro-Asian alliances inspired by the spread of socialist principles did not last well beyond the 1980s and ultimately occupied only a brief period in the development of Pan-Africanism and international socialist movements. However, despite Du Bois' foolishness regarding the Great Leap Forward, his diplomatic trip to China was an important step in the international fight for African independence. His trip made a declaration on an international stage that Africans were not content to be subjugated under Western rule, and that they were willing to stand up and defend their civil liberties.